Hi everyone, we're live. Good evening and welcome to this Rebel News live stream. We're going to be discussing the US elections, where we've gotten to and where it's going next. I've just been glued to my phone for the past 2 days trying to see where things are going, and it's still too close to tell. So we're joined this evening by Becca. She is a Derry-based socialist but born in Boston, and Kirstin Roberts, who is a socialist based in Chicago and the shop steward for the Teachers Union. Now, Kirstin has very gratefully joined us on her lunch break. So she's only going to be able to be with us for a while. You can see she's in the middle of teaching, actually. So, and we will imminently be joined by seasoned pro Eamonn McCann. So, I think whichever way this election goes, we can't really call it a victory for the left. We have, on one hand, Trump, a racist sort of hate monger, and on the other hand, we have Biden, who's just failure to offer any sort of positive program beyond the status quo has really just shown he's underperformed, just like in 2016. And it's looking like whichever way it goes, things will be quite ugly. So, in one way, there's been a sort of historic element to this election with the voter turnout, but on the other hand, it's more of the same. It's a lesser of two evil choice. So without any further ado, I'm going to let Kirstin lead us in. So Kirstin, what are you feeling?
Well, I joked when it was my old comrade Sean contacted me and said, would you like to say a few words? And I joked with him that probably I would be able to get out a few words, but that there might also be some uncontrollable weeping, because this is a moment in which the left, activists, people who stand and who marched for Black Lives Matter, women, immigrants, unionists are really forced to confront the terrible crisis and the reactionary nature of US politics. And it's particularly difficult in a moment in which just 5 months ago, we were marching in the millions in cities across the United States against police murder of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor. We were marching for Black lives. We were seeing an awakening of consciousness around the racist history of this country and a new desire to both learn about that and confront that history and current reality amongst millions and millions of people. In fact, the biggest protest movement that has ever existed in the history of this country. We were in the middle of that 5 months ago. And now we're staring down an election in which we still don't know. I haven't had time. I've been teaching all morning. I don't know if they've declared a winner. I don't think they will today. It's tipping towards Biden, but it's still very much up in the air who will be the president of this, the world's still largest empire. And either way, working people, Black people, women are going to be the losers. We are going to be bigger losers if Trump wins. Honestly, it will be a victory for the right and for the there's been a real consolidation of the right and the far right under Trump's presidency and heading of the Republican Party. But we won't really be winners, as you're pointing out, no matter who becomes president, because there has not been a positive program that would address the actual needs that ordinary people in this country have. Right now, we are facing a surge of coronavirus the same way you guys are. I've been reading the news from Britain. I'm a teacher. I teach preschool. I'm teaching from my basement because in our city, we have a 10% positivity rate, but in the Black and brown neighborhoods of Chicago and of every major city in this country, coronavirus rates in a neighborhood, just one neighborhood over from me, that is predominantly brown, working poor people, essential workers, the positivity rate is 30%, and people are dying. People are in hospitals, on ventilators. The staff at hospitals are beginning to be overwhelmed again. The hospitals are filling up. So we're in the middle of that crisis at the same time that we are in the middle of a presidential election. And the positive program that Biden offers around solving the corona crisis is simply to put on masks. That's not adequate. We need a radical program of reform. We need a national healthcare system that would guarantee healthcare for all. That is not something that is on offer right now from who we think will be the next president, Biden. There is a added challenge because of the way that the vote has been so closely split and divided between Biden and Trump, that the Senate, our version of Parliament, our Senate is going to be basically still split, or with a slight Republican right-wing majority. And that will mean total deadlock when it comes to relief packages that could make the coronavirus a little less deadly and a little less miserable. So it's not good times right now. I think the biggest question for the left that's confronting the left here, the union movement, the Black Lives Matter movement, the youth movement, the biggest question that we're facing is why? Why was Trump able to not just hold on to his right-wing base, the religious right, that kind of thing, the gun nuts, et cetera. Why was he not only able to hold on to that, but to grow that and to radicalize a good section of that? Why was he able to do that? And why, even in a period when we've seen the mass protests and where we've seen public opinion on many issues, for instance, the issue of healthcare, 70% of the American people want something, what we call Medicare for all, a national healthcare program where healthcare would be guaranteed. 70% of people want that. How could it be that we see the victory of this right-wing lunatic who every day gets on TV, lies to people? I mean, openly just lies to people, gets on TV and says incredibly strange things like people should inject themselves with bleach to stop coronavirus. Openly racist, horrific things about women. This guy is a complete train wreck of a politician, one would think, and yet he's grown his support in the time that he's been president. And some of that really has to do with the lack of any sort of a left political alternative in this country. People are so completely cynical and turned off to politicians in this country that there is a strong degree to which ordinary people and even working class people will look at somebody like Trump and say, at least he tells it like it is. At least he tells the truth. People's expectations in their political leaders are that low. And that's a real tragedy of the American left. The things that aren't tragedies, that I do want to touch on that, is that we have had the growth of a left and an explicitly socialist left over the past 5 years in the US. And we've had a few electoral victories. People will know of AOC and the Squad, the women of color socialists. There's not a lot of them, but they're in Congress. They have a national political stage that they speak from for things like Medicare for all and a Green New Deal. Well, all of the Squad, the socialists, won their re-election campaigns quite handily, and 2 more joined them in the Congress, the national. But I've heard that the Democratic Socialists of America endorsed, I think, 32 candidates, and 26 of them won seats. So that shows you that when there is a positive program put forward that addresses the need for unemployment relief, healthcare, and all the rest of it, people will vote for it. And they'll even vote for it when it's socialist. We're going to see a lot of debate over the next few weeks here and months about other reasons. There's going to be a lot of alternative ideas put forward about what's going on in this country. You're going to hear things like, this country is a racist backwater. Well, guess what it is? It is a racist country. It was founded in slavery and genocide. It continues to use racism to divide and to punish the working class. That is true. But is that the only thing that's going on in this country? I would argue not. I think there's going to be a lot of alternative narratives on the left put forward about what's going on here, but I really want to caution us to look closely at and analyze some of the data as it comes out about who voted and why they voted and what they were actually after, and to understand that the only way out of the impasse now is to, number one, defend the right to democracy in this country, that every vote should be counted and that the election isn't over until that happens. Number two, that we have to build our forces of the left in the unions and in the anti-racist movement. We have to build those not just for an electoral alternative, we have to build those in struggle, in the streets, together in demonstrations, because no matter who takes the White House, we are really in for the fight of our lives right now. And that has to be a fight that involves people in struggle and builds solidarity. The union I'm part of, the Chicago Teachers Union, is part of a coalition of left-leaning trade unions that are saying quite openly, we will strike together to make sure that every vote is counted if Trump tries to steal the election, which the news today indicates that the years he has spent packing right-wing judges onto the federal court system will now be paying off for him, because he's going to try to sue to win an election that he is losing, both in popular vote as well as the Electoral College. I'm going to stop there. If you have any questions at all, throw them at me before I have to leave. I have to leave at 2 my time. That's 8 your time?
Thank you very much for that, Kirstin. In that case, since you're going to be leaving imminently, perhaps we might let Becca and Eamonn come in just briefly initially. Becca, perhaps you could come in, and then we'll direct our questions to Kirstin.
Yeah, thanks, Kirstin. That was great. I'm actually going to ask a few questions as well. I hope that that's okay in terms of sort of what's going on. I mean, I think one of the things that is really clear in the lead up to the election is that Biden is very much was not offering a vision, and so that the people who went out to vote for him were very much voting against Trump rather than for something progressive. And so, you know, in particular, the fact that the entire primary system in terms of for a Democrat was around actually finding someone more and more moderate as a hope to counter Republicans and, you know, sort of keep the status quo, and sort of what that does to the electorate in general in terms of pushing not only official politics to the right, but also I think it engenders that cynicism that you were talking about in terms of not actually thinking that real change is going to happen, seeing the Trump's, talking offhandedly as sort of like a good thing rather than the actual policies and racism that's beneath it. So just in terms of Biden as a political choice of the Democratic Party, I thought maybe you could say something about that. I mean, obviously he was, selected at the height in some ways of the protest movement, of the Black Lives Matter movement, and he is, one of the architects of the crime bill. He is very much part of the sort of establishment that has created the conditions of police brutality and mass incarceration and impoverishment. So just a little bit around sort of that process as well, because I think attached to that, we were all looking across the water and sort of seeing that, similarly, I think, to how people here were looking at Corbyn, seeing a breath of fresh air, maybe within a party that wasn't going to reform itself, but a breath of fresh air in terms of an actual policies such as the New Green Deal, taxing the rich, getting money out of politics, that were incredible, $15 an hour minimum wage, those type of things that would make people's real lives so much better. And then the sort of burning or bust, like this idea of trying to like go all of the left, trying to go all out for him, I think is important. Then sort of what have been some of the conversations around how to go from the two-party system that we have right now to building that third party that workers, socialist or working class party that actually can follow through on the types of policies that Sanders was putting forward. And I think looking at the squad getting reelected, looking at others who I didn't know about the DSA backed candidates is very interesting. So it shows that there is that thirst and that obviously that desire. So it's not just a sort of a right-wing shift. So I can talk a little about that. And I guess the other thing that I think is important to take from this election, and I'll stop on this so you can, is just this is what polarization looks like. And so how do we win, and how does the left sort of consolidate itself with the union movement and with the sort of social movements in the context of a very, very polarized society? So I'll stop there and then I'll come back on some other things that you later.
Should I jump back in here, Alexandra?
Yes, maybe Kirstin, because you have limited time.
Yes. So, those are great questions and insights, Becca. We have seen the growth of a socialist left in this country, the Democratic Socialists of America, who really were an outgrowth, but also were the main activist energy flowing into the Bernie Sanders campaign, are now, the last I read was around 70,000 members, which is very significant for the United States. And I would say in most cities and even small cities across the US, there are activist chapters of the DSA that work on local issues as well as electoral campaigns. And that's been a real positive thing in the last 5 years. I think that there was a lot of debate after it became clear that the US ruling class was looking for a way out of a crisis that they're facing because of COVID and the ensuing economic crisis due to COVID, but also because Trump, as particularly in, I think, when you think about how US power and political prestige are projected, what has happened under Trump has not been good for a large section of the US ruling class. For a section of it, they love it. A section of it has not been pleased with it. And when it became clear that they were going to support Biden And all of the money, and this was after, you might have heard about the South Carolina primaries, which Biden won. All of the money began to flow towards Biden. All of the other Democratic candidates dropped out of the race, so it became a Biden versus Sanders race. There was a ton of debate on the left about what to do, and especially as it became clear that Bernie was going to lose, and that once again, the Democrats we're going to put up, a complete piece of white toast. I mean, the guy is just boring. He has no charisma, a real bore, but a safe candidate from the point of view of capital. He was not going to rock the boat. He was going to make some minor reforms, right? He was going to reform healthcare. He's going to protect the reforms that Obama put in, maybe extend those a little bit, but he wasn't going to go for national healthcare. He wasn't going to attack the insurance industry. There was a big debate. How do we oppose Trump and Trumpism if we don't have a candidate that is putting forward a positive program, that is Biden, that is just putting forward more of the same, not being Trump? Most of the left, including the vast majority of people in the DSA, of course, voted for Biden and against Trump. It was, there was not this was not a third party kind of space in this election. The vote was way up. It was bigger than it was than in the Obama election. But a lot of that vote, the increase in vote, also flowed towards Trump. But it is true that more young people voted, more Black people voted, and that is the reason that Biden will probably eke out a nail biter of a victory. The hatred of Trump is real. The fear of Trump is real. And that's what drove people to the polls to vote against him. There is not clarity about what kind of alternative to put forward yet. We are debating that. And there's part of how we grow, I will argue, is connected to how the debates over what happened in this election are conducted and what people think about it. This is a pretty low moment. Polarization, as you said, is real, but it's a polarization between right and left where there is a strong party with billions of dollars in funding for the right, and there is nothing like that for the left. And we have to face that reality head on. But we do have, what we do have is the potential for real solidarity built from struggle. We have internationalism on our side, and we have the ability to analyze, not just feel, although we're feeling. We have the ability to really analyze and figure out, why did we come so close to a second term of Trump? What are the weak points, and what are our potential strengths moving forward?
Thank you very much for that, Kirstin. And just before you go, if I may, Chair's prerogative, ask you a couple questions myself. So you sort of mentioned a lot of the big movements that we've seen this year. I mean, the teachers union in Chicago is one, but also just the massive Black Lives Matter revolts that we saw. I'm just wondering what you think from being on the ground. What have they been doing, Ray, the elections, and how have their demands intersected with the elections at all? And I guess briefly, if you've got the time, I'd love to know what you think about how Trump has expanded his vote, as you say, but it's also happened among Latino communities, Black communities, and among women too. And what should we make of this?
I want to make sure I have your question right. Are you asking about how the movements around Black Lives Matter and the teachers' struggles, et cetera, how those have intersected with the election?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, just to add a little lag time. You froze up on me for a second. Sorry. So my union, the Chicago Teachers Union, which is, a pretty militant union, we have gone on strike, and we've beaten the conservative Democratic mayors that have presided over corporate education reform here. And we're kind of looked to as a union that would represent, a more militant and left-wing kind of social justice unionism. Our union had a debate, just so people understand the political, how this all intersects. We had a debate over endorsing Bernie. There's a lot of support for that. And the vote in our House of Delegates, which is our rank and file body of leadership, elected leadership, voted against endorsing Bernie Sanders, even though he had spoken to us. I think it was right during our strike, right at the end of our strike, was really supportive of us during the strike, had a much better program on education. That was voted down by people who wanted to support, mainly because of arguments made by people who wanted to support Elizabeth Warren, kind of a progressive, but not really left-wing establishment Democrat. And then after Biden became the candidate of the Democratic Party, my union voted to endorse Biden. We were really disappointed. The left-wing and activists in our union were really disappointed by that, because we saw it as a sort of a lowering of our horizons. The Black Lives Matter movement has been very, I think that there are many different political perspectives within the Black Lives Matter movement. It is not just one organization that speaks with one voice. There are people who look and who are very committed to building something, a political organization to the left of the Democratic Party, and who do not see the Democratic Party as in any way representing Black people's interests. I would say most people who were part of the demonstrations and movement for justice for George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and all other victims of police violence would have gone to the polls and voted against Trump. And that's how they would conceive of a vote for Biden. You vote against Trump, even though you're voting for Biden, one of the architects of the crime bill. Why? Because there's nothing else on offer to people. And it is incredibly stunting to the American political left that this time and time again is the choice. Fortunately, with the growth of a vibrant socialist left and a revival of working class struggle around the teachers' struggle over the past several years, a new generation of socialists has been born, and there are explicit socialist candidates locally and nationally that we've built campaigns around. But let me tell you, those are not easy either. And that is taking work. Here in this state, though, and I just want to sort of make this connection because I think it's so important, probably for what you guys face as well. In this state, we had a ballot initiative that would have made it possible for us to tax the rich at a higher rate than working class people. And it would have been a really progressive thing to have it passed. And my union was all in fighting for this. We lost that. We lost it. We needed about 10 percentage points more than we ended up getting. We got about 48, I think, % of the vote. You think, why? Why would people not be in favor of that? What happened? Well, in Chicago, where there's an activist left, we had 70% of the vote. It was lost in the small towns and in the rural parts of the state where there is no activism, no unions, no left-wing politics. People get their politics out of the church and off of the television. And that's how we lost that vote. So activism around these more progressive campaigns is the thing that matters. And it's why the socialists who are going to Congress are going, because activists were on the ground fighting for every vote.
Thank you very much, Kirstin. That was a very illuminating answer. And just sure, let us know if you have to dash. But Well, if you have another minute, perhaps we'll take one more question off the stream here. And it is, let's see. It's asking, what do you think is sort of the potential of the DSA to be the vehicle of breaking away from the Democratic Party? It's called a dirty break, I see it's referred to in the comment as. So what do you think of that?
Okay, so I hesitate to answer that question because although I am a member of the DSA and I follow the debates and the questions and I have opinions about this question, I am not active on a day-to-day basis in my DSA chapter. I'm active in my union. I'm active in a neighborhood organization that's doing different work around working class issues. My sense of this question, though, as an opinion, is that the DSA is going to be part of helping to develop political alternatives to the left of the Democratic Party, but that there is not any sort of unanimity within the DSA at this point, nor in the immediate future. I would, from my vantage point, around the question of exactly how we build those alternatives to the left of the Democratic Party, and what the relationship to the Democratic Party is going to be as we build those alternatives. I think what people would agree on in the DSA, that the majority would agree on, is that we do need something, that the Democratic Party itself, the leadership of it is centrist, is not committed enough to our issues, and to working class issues, and that we do need more left-wing electoral choices and movements. I think almost everybody in the DSA would agree with that. That's why they joined the DSA. They want to build a socialist left. But it is extremely difficult the way election laws are constructed in the United States. It is almost impossible in most places in this country to run a third-party candidate without being accused of helping the right wing. And when we have the right wing in the ascendancy in the form of Donald Trump, to run a third-party candidate right now and take votes away from Democrats would basically be extremely hard and put you in a tricky position. I myself am in a safe state where in Illinois, it was clear Biden was going to win. On the ballot, there were other candidates to the left of the Democrats, including a Green Party candidate that I cast a ballot for. That was an easy choice to make in a state in which it was not up for grabs. Trump was not going to take Illinois. Activists and socialists and unionists in other states, Michigan, Georgia, you're hearing about them on the news. Imagine the pressure that they would be under to cast a vote for Biden in this sort of an election. So that's what we're up against. When we talk about wanting to build third-party alternatives, we're up against a tremendous pressure in the form of money and law, election law, and all the rest of it. It still has, in my opinion, it's got to be done. I think that there is a debate about whether we use the Democratic ballot line. We work within the Democratic Party to try and put up great candidates like AOC and, the rest of the squad. Cori Bush just won out of St. Louis. She's an important candidate. You should go and read about her. There is a debate over that. It's a live debate. It's a real debate. I think there's good points on both sides. My tendency is to say that we need to move more explicitly towards naming the Democratic Party as part of our problem and not part of the solution. No matter how we're getting our candidates into power, we have to be real. The Democratic Party called around last night and called off their support for demonstrations against Trump last night. He's trying to steal the election. Thank God activists went and protested anyway. But the Democratic Party mainstream did not want people on the streets last night. That's a problem, and we need to name that problem very explicitly.
Thank you, Kirstin. Sorry, my connection just disappeared there for a moment, but I think that's absolutely the message that we have to take going forward here, is that who's willing to mobilize people on the streets is not Biden and it's not Trump. So I guess, what is the next step? What is after this is all, the dust has settled, and who knows when that will be, because there could be ongoing challenges, legal challenges from Trump. What is the next step forward for lefts, progressives, all the shades under potentially Trump or Biden, do you think? Most likely Biden from what we're seeing now, but
I would like to hear your take on that. My take is we need to have some time over the next couple of weeks to do some pretty serious analysis. I really believe we're in a moment where ideas and some clear analysis from the left is going to be important. Socialists are going to get blamed, right? We're going to be told we went too far to the left in the primaries. We're going to be told we're already seeing things about Black people who who voted for Trump are the problem. Women who voted for Trump. I mean, there's going to be a lot of crazy and wrong-headed ideas. There's going to be a lot of demoralization. People here are at a moment where it's very easy to look around and say, what the hell is wrong with people in this country? I want to put my head down. I want to get out. Like, can I move to Ireland and like be part of building? Because it's really demoralizing to see that there were very few votes separating Biden and Trump. It's a scary moment for people. I think ideas are really going to matter, and I'd love to hear more what you guys have to say. I'm at 2:10 exactly. I'm going to sign off. So if I leave suddenly, it's not you, it's my preschoolers.
Thank you, Kirstin. I guess I'll preemptively say thank you for answering our questions and chatting with you. It's been very, very illuminating, shall we say. And I guess we'll let Eamonn come in now. You've been silenced for long enough. So, Eamonn.
Right, am I being heard? Can you hear me? You can. Very good, very good. Well, I listened to all that, and of course, particularly to you, Kirstin, and I kept thinking sort of every couple of minutes, gosh, that's interesting. That's interesting. Or it's all very, very interesting, but it's all over the place. I don't mean you're all over the place, Kirstin, but there's so much there, sort of, and when I think about it and talk about it, sometimes when I'm watching CNN and so on, which I do quite a lot, I know they're boring sentences, the New York Times every day, and I find it sometimes very difficult to work out in what perspective I'm supposed to see these things. I mean, partly it's to do with technology and modern communications and so forth. But I mean, over this last couple of days, I mean, the discussions that have been going on here have been sort of more, I'm not going to say more sophisticated, but certainly more knowledgeable, more clued up about what's happening in the United States and about the personalities and so forth, and the difference between one state and the next in terms of its composition and political leanings and so forth. And problem with American politicians are world figures, whether they know it or not, and whether they're sort of overtly and consciously making statements sort of for the globe and internationally and so forth. And for example, I was talking last week to somebody just before the election, and somebody mentioned AOC. And I said, yeah, I really like her. To which the reply came, sure, half the world's in love with AOC. Now, that's a remarkable thing to be said by somebody sort of on the left and the other side of the Atlantic. It's also true, as Becca will know. Everybody that we know, they love AOC. There's a number of reasons for that, which are simplistic and which don't go to ideas. Nevertheless, sort of, it's an indication sort of the way in which so many people feel involved. And the reason, of course, the main reason why they feel so involved, here in Ireland certainly and in other places, is that they know it's going to affect them. it's actually going to affect Ireland. It's going to affect Europe and so forth, or at least potentially sort of it's going to affect it. Sort of that means that, for example, it's the things that I would miss, which maybe somebody in America wouldn't miss in the election, is argument over a foreign policy. I heard nothing at all during the election about Palestine. Nothing. Not a mention, or about Israel, indeed. You know, no doubt it was mentioned here or there, and I didn't get it, but I paid a lot of close attention. I'm a political junkie as well as a socialist, and I just didn't get it. Very, very little. I heard a mention of Brexit and the implications for the United Kingdom and for US-UK relations. I didn't hear a discussion about it. I certainly didn't hear any discussion which indicated that people knew about it in any deep way or in any detailed way. And I find that quite remarkable. And it's reflected there back here and back sort of in Europe. For example, you know, it's one of the, I'm going to say it's not a raging controversy, one of the sort of things that pop up every now and again, sort of in Southern Ireland and the Republic, has to do sort of with the regular stopovers of American warplanes from the United States on their way, mainly to the Middle East and Afghanistan. And of course, they arrive at Shannon Airport, and they are usually, there's lots, one of the most common sites sort of in Shannon, sort of is in the restaurants and pubs sort of around the airport, or American service personnel. You know, sort of I mean, it's quite a strange thing. You wouldn't think it down on the banks of the River Shannon, or the Limerick and Munster in Ireland. You're going to see it, and yet it's a very common sight. There's very little. There's a big victory was won sort of just a couple of days ago, which is worth mentioning, that a couple of peace campaigners from the United States, I mean, were found not guilty of criminal damage after they, of course, freely admitted, indeed in court boasted about, and rightly so, about doing physical damage to an American Air Force plane. It's actually a tiny bit of damage. I could have fixed it myself. That is to an American plane which was on its way to Afghanistan. You know, so you get things like that which are heartwarming and so on, but it's been impossible to raise any controversy about this in Ireland because people are frightened of it. Let me give you an example. The party on the cusp of power are then Sinn Féin in Southern Ireland. I mean, the right-wing parties, every day they do more to discredit themselves and to look like fools. You know, our Sinn Féin's got military discipline, and with good reasons. It's got military discipline, and it very much is going to, it's already the largest party in Ireland overall. I think it's going to be in government within the next couple of years, and perhaps sooner than that. At the political establishment fragments more than it has been. Now we have sort of left wing, they claim to be, you know, sort of right on up the workers, you know, and all that there. They won't take on the Shannon issue. And I'm saying this as an example of, you know, the way in which sort of America and the American interests and so on come to be dominant. If we were talking about any other country in the world, so we wouldn't have this problem at all. Left-wing people would have one view, right-wing people would have another, and you'd argue it out and shout at one another or fight or whatever. There's a near consensus in Southern Ireland, best not to mention Shannon. Best not to mention the fact that Ireland, the Republic of Ireland, which boasts about its military neutrality throughout its existence, is clearly not neutral when it comes to American wars in the Middle East. Indeed, is giving practical support to the United States, and it is not a big issue, and that has not been raised day in and day out, sort of in Southern Ireland, sort of by anybody, really. And if you did, you probably wouldn't get much resonance about it. Let me give you another example of what I'm talking about. I heard an item, a very interesting little sort of throwaway item on the Irish television, RTE News last night, was they went to Doonbeg, sort of where Donald Trump has got a golf course and a hotel, and allegedly employs 400 people. I don't know if that's true or not, but they interviewed a lot of local people. They thought that Mr. Trump was a wonderful man. Doesn't matter what else says. Don't tell, oh yeah, he talks a bit crude and so forth, but he's brought jobs to this town. So if we wouldn't have a word to, and when he comes here, he's very, very nice, you know, and his sons talk to the children in the streets and so on. It's marvelous. Nobody will have a word said against him. Then RTE, this was the basis of the little story that someone had dreamed of, went to Westport, as it's sort of where, I forget exactly where, sort of where Joe Biden's two grandfathers, or great grandfathers, whatever they are, came from, interviewed people on the street, and exactly the same. At this time with Biden. What a wonderful man. He brings glory and credit to our town when he becomes president, and so forth. The narrowness, the shallowness of that parochial. I mean, the idea that in Ireland we can be parochial about United States politics is really very strange. And yet we are, and it's an example of the way in which different rules apply to America and the different influences apply, and they are shaped sort of by history. In particular, Biden kept calling himself an Irish Catholic, which I found a bit strange at the start. Then I got used to it. I'm an Irish Catholic. How can you think that I'm a subversive? How can you think that I'm going to kick over the apple cart? I'm an Irish Catholic. An Irish Catholic. He's a bloody great grandfather, and may well have been. He's too great. And may well have been Irish. What is this about? And it's not about ethnicity. It's about maybe he has to present himself somehow in terms of fitting into the melting pot and that kaleidoscope of ethnicities that you've got in the United States. There's also, the more I think about it, let me recommend a book before I go any further. A book which I think everybody should read. It's called The Famine Irish and the Racial American State. Racial American State, not racist. The Famine, written by a friend of mine, so one of the reasons I'd be plugging it, of Peter O'Neill. He's a lecturer in I forget where it actually, the University of Georgia at Athens. And he writes a book which I think helps explain an awful lot of this and helps explain Irish America and sort of perhaps the relationship between the United States and other countries as well. If you look at there's a paradox, seemingly at times, sort of thing that the last time I was in the United States a couple of decades ago, because they wouldn't let me in ever afterwards, I spoke about a string of public meetings. And I remember it being that you had people who had 2 points to make when they stood up to speak, or even conversation before and after meetings. One was that they believed in the revolutionary tradition of Irish republicanism, were extremely anti-British and anti-imperialist and all the rest of it. Loads of them were saying that. They also were American patriots. And you think, well, how can that be? How can you hold these two thoughts in your head together? Lots of people can. Bruce Springsteen can, for example. It's I heard this wee deviation, sort of, but not that I thought of it when I said that. Springsteen's got a bit of Irish blood, but he's mainly Italian and Dutch, actually. And it's a few years ago, Springsteen, it was just after 9/11, in the new year after 9/11, he was being interviewed. It was about a horrible year it was, terrible year. And this had just passed. Glad to see the end. Mind you, one good thing did happen in it. We killed bin Laden. I mean, now, I'm a naive rock and roll guy, with a very sentimental attitude towards people like Bruce Springsteen. I was absolutely shocked that he say one good thing happened. We killed bin Laden. And it struck me sort of the power sort of American patriotism sort of is absolutely phenomenal. It is sort of in its own people. He referred to in an interview on an Irish television program the same night. He's doing all these interviews. He does them all from the same room. I mean, really cheapskate stuff, but nevertheless, that's he was talking about the song, which is often discussed, "Born in the USA," which is widely seen sort of as an American patriotic song. Now, born in the USA, but actually, if you look at the words, it's of course it's very critical. It's all about coming out to fight the yellow man, blah, 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 and Southeast Asia, and so forth. But more than that, you see, and this is the way things are coded. I can remember the program for the Born in the USA tour, which I went to in Dublin. I mean, sort of in case, I'm probably sentimental and uncritical about all this. I mean, I've seen Springsteen 22 times, which is a lot. The program for the Born in the USA tour, if you get it, it was about 40 pages long. If you flick through it, every single page that you open was red, white, and blue in different ways. If you flick through it and just look, you would say this is a super patriotic right-wing Republican publication, but it wasn't. But it's all coded in there. And of course, it's got no right I don't know how this is, I hadn't intended to say this, but I started this, that it's an example of the way in which you can, that the context in popular culture is everything, and it can be used and cynically abused. The context in which you say things. The main reason why Born in the USA sounds like a patriotic song, it's a rock and roll song. That's American music, with a big chorus and so forth. That's the whole framework of it. It comes from an American place, and so on. And an awful lot of our culture does. An awful lot of our culture, sort of, in Ireland does. So in that sense, even people who are being critical and sharply critical, hostile to a particular American political actions abroad or anywhere else, there is a warm, fuzzy feeling about Americanness going on at the same time. So that can triumph over loads of things. I mean, I see Alexandra started glaring at me there. Oh yeah. Let me finish this. I'll come back to the question a wee bit more. I couldn't hear you there.
Body language.
Yes, indeed.
Very important.
I mean, all that is, and blue jeans are very important when you're trying to put forward an image which is actually real political connotations. If somebody's wearing blue jeans sort of on the stage, that's an American. That's an American. If it's not an American, it's somebody pretending to be an American. So all that context is very important in terms of the message which is taken from it. And let me try sort of and bring that back to what's supposed to be the theme sort of that we're talking about. But there's a question there about is there a chance of building sort of a third party, sort of another party in the United States? This is not an American question. This question which is everywhere. In Britain, for example, the argument about whether you should have a left-wing party to the left of the Labour Party has been going on since I was ever involved in politics. I mean, for more than 50 years, I've listened to the debate on this. And of course, it never ends. It never gets it. Exactly the same thing is true sort of the Democratic Party in the United States. The only bit of wisdom in my experience sort of that I can offer sort of on that is that argument will not be settled sort of in an intellectual way. It won't be settled by sort of exchanges of ideological viewpoints. It will be settled when there is a huge it's the only way it'll be settled. When there's an upsurge from below. I mean, Kirstin was mentioning the fact sort of that where there was vibrant movements and political union organizations and so forth, you would get left candidates. Right? I mean, it sounds so obvious that it's sort of banal even to state it. Nevertheless, it's very important. There's no point in Britain at the moment, sort of there's a chance now, maybe with the betrayal of Jeremy Corbyn by sort of the whole right-wing establishment, sort of in the Labour Party. But unless Corbyn came in the crest of a wave of agitation and action, and I said it wasn't somehow that he just won sort of the attention of people or that he was charismatic, which he wasn't and isn't, but nevertheless sort of what powered him sort of into the leadership of the Labour Party and then into a very good result in 2013 was the level of struggle. As you say, it seems that's true everywhere, and that's ABC. For socialists that we do that. So the key thing about whether there's going to be a party to the left of the Democrats is how much activity there is. Sorry, I'll stop there.
Thank you. That was very interesting points you make there. I was waiting for a breath there for me to perhaps interject, but maybe we'll let Becca respond to a bit of that interesting cultural commentary.
I mean, you can't have a meeting with Eamonn with a tangent about Bruce Springsteen. So we appreciate the boss, through and through. Every American does. But just to go back, because I think one of the things that Kirstin said at the beginning is really important. Like, first of all, this election isn't over, and we can't pretend that it's over. So we obviously don't know who's going to win yet, which is, it looks that it's sliding towards Biden. But the reality is that Trump has put in a whole slew of lawsuits and trying to use different court cases in order to further disenfranchise people in the U.S. And so one of the things that Kirstin said is that we have to defend the right of democracy, a limited democracy as it is in the United States. And is anywhere really, but we have to defend that right. And I think that's really, really important because there is massive voter suppression that happens in the United States sort of year in, year out. There's massive disenfranchisement that happens. And then I think with Trump very openly saying that he's not going to accept the results of the election unless he wins, it goes into question about, what is this next few weeks or months going to look like. And we don't know if there's going to be what the protests on the street are going to look like. I mean, Trump knows that his supporters will attack, left-wing protesters. They'll drive cars into protests. They will kill people. I mean, we know that has happened in the past year. And so there's, I think, a real threat from the far right and the organized far right, but then also from the institutions such as the courts and more. So I think that defense of the election is going to be important if it looks like there's going to be vote stealing and things getting held up in the court. I mean, this isn't anything new. Like it happened in 2000, but I think this time there's this real feeling of chaos with it. And so, I mean, I wanted to hear more from Kirstin. I might follow up with her later about sort of what is that feeling of chaos and anxiety around this election that almost everybody I've talked to in the US is feeling, not just the fear of Trump, but the fear of Trumpism and sort of the insecurity of that all. Now, that doesn't mean that the solution of Biden is a comforting thought, and I think Kirstin went through that really well. But I do think that that's an important starting point. The other thing that Kirstin talked about is sort of having to reflect on and trying to what to make of the vote and of the election. Obviously, the pundits were saying that Biden was going to walk away with this blue surge. That didn't happen. Votes went up. It was a historic election in terms of the numbers of votes, but obviously, the votes for Trump went up as well as for Biden, and sort of looking at who voted for what and how. And I think some of the points that Kirstin made around if there's an activist or socialist or some kind of movement from below in an area, you'll be more likely to see at least a sizable part of that population vote for the alternative. And I saw a question come up while she was talking about some of these left-wing candidates that have been thrown up by the movements and whether or not, and there's a question like, is that how it has worked? And in a lot of ways it has. So for example, there's been socialists who were part of the campaigning for the $15 minimum wage, part of the campaigning around the Green New Deal, part of campaigning around different things that have built really a movement around themselves. They haven't built it. They were activists. They were part of a movement, and they were sort of thrown up and ran for local election or ran for state election out of those movements. And that's what we see with Cori Bush. Kirstin mentioned her. She was a leader of the Ferguson protests in Ferguson, obviously, and very much part of the Black Lives Matter movement. And she won handedly, but won amazingly. And she actually has a victory speech that everybody should just Google, Cori Bush's victory speech, and it's really beautiful in that she's basically saying we're going to keep fighting and we're going to fight for all the things that people need. And so I think that that's really really important. And then just the last thing I'll say before we throw it back to other questions that maybe that we have are the part of building the forces of the left are also to try to fight against the cynicism that Kirstin was talking about that happen in politics. And I think that really happened here in the north of Ireland all the time. The cynicism, like, here we go again, sectarianism, here we go again, just the way in which there can be a wrench sort of thrown into any political debate that repolarizes in different ways. And so I think obviously having an analysis on the left of sort of what's going on, but also to have the sense that like we actually, like in the US, need to build and continue to build an anti-racist class politic that's able to make people's actual lives, the material realities of their lives better, but also go at the structures of the United States and the reality that it is a country that was built on genocide and slavery. And so the institutions of the United States are rotten to the core. And need to be fought and to be dismantled. And obviously, the Democratic Party has no interest in doing that. And so what Kirstin was talking about at the end, in terms of how do we get from where we are to building something that's able to do that, there's a lot of strategic debates, and I think in different cities things look differently. And I don't think that there's a pure answer. I think that politics is the art. There's an art of messiness. I think Eamonn's right that this is not a uniquely American problem. This is a United States problem. This is a problem across the world over. The capitalist system has done in terms of bourgeois politics, and has defended, and the bourgeois politics hold up the system that oppresses and exploits us. So anyways, I just think that because the election's not over, I do think we should think about, I know other questions have come up, Alex, that maybe want to sort of tap back into. So.
Yes, thank you very much, Becca. Brevity is the soul of wit, as they say. But I think one of the themes that's really come up in the comments is sort of the question of, it seems during this election that it's been really easy to undermine confidence in the democratic process for a number of different reasons. I mean, between this whole, stop the votes, stop counting, count the votes, this seems like just giving people their basic due to have their vote counted has become such an object of consternation. And even I saw a tweet today doing the rounds, and it was essentially asking the Supreme Court whether state legislator could essentially substitute in their preference for electors, or their preference for the vote. I thought it was quite remarkable. It was someone telling the Republican state legislators to do their duty and to just go for the Republican electors. But would you like to comment, Becca or Eamonn, on why you think this is? I think it ties in with your question about cynicism, and also if this confidence has been so undermined. Another question that has really come through in the comments is what is the potential of mobilizing in the streets to defend the right to vote and to defend the right for one's vote to be counted?
Well, I think like cynicism over.
Well, my honest answer.
Go ahead, Eamonn.
I just think the honest answer to the question, sort of what I believe about, is I don't know, and I don't think anybody else does either. I think that not to be too sort of a po-faced word, there is a sort of situation of political enemy, sort of, it seems to me, sort of to be rampant everywhere. There's an absence of norms. We used to know sort of a few years ago, there's the left and the right, and there's the dividing line on unions, on pay, sort of on toleration, sort of other cultures, and your embrace sort of other things. And that was quite clear. It's not clear anymore. Here's an interesting thing, which is cheering, that I noticed last night, where somebody's rounding up the whole position in Florida and going through that John, whatever you call him on CNN, who remembers every county in the whole of the United States. They're going to talk about a county in Florida which had voted strongly for Trump, something like 60-40 for Trump. There was also on the ballot there a question of raising the minimum wage to $15. Which that's what I said. There was 60-40 for that as well. In other words, and one of the commentators said, on a different program, that when it's put simply, when people are asked, what do you think of a simple economic proposition? They will vote with sense. They vote, should there be a $15 minimum? Yes, I said. Should you vote for Trump or Biden? Far more complicated question, subtle question, apparently. In other words, sort of there is an underlying common sense. Millions of working class viewers of voters, which may not be reflected sort of in the party stances at all. And I take that as the people are more radical than the parties dare think. That's one of the lessons that I would take, from the US election in the last couple of weeks.
Becca.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. I think that's true, but also on the same token, Kirstin just talked about how the tax ballot initiative in Illinois didn't pass, which was to tax the rich, and it's insane that a tax that right now where you have wealth inequality the way it is, you have Jeff Bezos like a disgusting amount of money every second of the day during the coronavirus pandemic, where people have been thrown out of work, and yet in Illinois, a tax the rich. I think one of the problems was it wasn't called the tax the rich amendment or initiative, but it should have been. So I think that that's not true, but it also shows like why an actually articulated alternative is so important. It is understandable and all of that as well. But just to go back in terms of the streets and what we might see and how we organize. I think that what Kirstin talked about in terms of labor organizing against the stealing of an election is so important. So that call came out of Rochester, New York, and then moved to other affiliates of the AFL-CIO in Western Mass, and then Seattle, and then Illinois, or the Chicago area. And so there is this sort of feeling of like labor needs to be put into motion right now in order to, one, stand up against anything untoward, as you're saying, or the chaos of Trump either stealing an election or just saying that he's going to, which I think has its own impact, as we know that when Trump says whatever he wants on Twitter, it does have a real impact, even if it's just made up things. So I think that that's a really positive movement. But I also think what's important about that is then hopefully those sort of united front, so to speak, of variety different unions and activist circles or whatever, talking about sort of a general strike if need be, also can put forward part of the vision of what types of things that we need to be fighting for in the here and now. So when Kirstin talked about the equivalent of like an NHS, which obviously in Ireland we're trying to fight for an all Ireland NHS because of not only because of the pandemic, but also because of the reality of for-profit healthcare just destroying people's lives. But that is a very concrete demand in the US that the unions would be for. But there's other things as well. Housing in the US, across the US, is like Dublin. In terms of people not being able to afford anywhere to live, while at the same time massive homelessness and no safety net. And so I think that those different things that the unions can actually start articulating, or not start, they have been for a long time, are going to be important in terms of class demand. But I think that anti-racism and anti-sexism is going to be so important as part to understand how the unions need to, and other movements or whatever, need to move forward in terms of trying to combat Trump. I'm not saying that every person who voted for Trump is an out and out racist, but they don't have a problem with racism if you vote for Trump. And I think that's a really big problem. But it's similarly, maybe Eamonn could say something about this also. I think it's not different than people who would just vote DUP here, in terms of, the DUP is out and out supporting Trump, and racist, misogynist, all sorts of things as well. But it doesn't mean that every person thinks that, but that is not a big enough problem. And so how do we create the politics from below where that becomes a big enough of a problem for people that they want to vote for something different?
Certainly. And I think it's sort of an interesting thing I just saw today was that Proposition 17 has been passed in California, which would give felons who are on parole the right to vote. I think this could be a very interesting development because, as we know, denying convicted felons the right to vote is one of the biggest forms of voter suppression in the states today. But I guess to return to a point that you kind of raised earlier, Eamon, on the question of foreign policy, it certainly doesn't seem to have been the biggest driver, perhaps, in these elections in terms of what Biden and Trump have been arguing about. In fact, I mean, to me, it seems that Trump has been doing as he will, and Biden has been saying, well, I'm not that. So it's not really much of a positive program either way. But I think particularly the implications, I mean, you can speak on other contexts, but I'm particularly interested to hear what you might think about Palestine, because, you know, there's activists on the ground there who are saying that this election has basically been used by the Israeli state as a cover for destroying Palestinian homes while the spotlight is elsewhere. And I think, you know, obviously the Democrats have got, to them, they have not had a very good history or track record for Palestinians. But it's interesting to see that with Trump essentially cutting aid to Palestine from the US in 2018, that I was in West Jerusalem there 2 years ago, and they had signs up that says Trump makes Israel great again. So really, it just goes to show what you were kind of saying earlier about the Americanization and the impact that they have beyond America. I mean, if you'd like to come back on any of that.
This is about that sectarian question first. And about Northern Ireland's got its own special kind of sectarianism, of course. And one of the things about it, as Becca was saying there, you know, that the Democratic Unionist Party, the extreme Unionist Party in the North, is gung-ho for Trump. And has been, and their MPs and whatever, all speaking out on local radio and so on, that Trump is a great guy and so forth. But as I said, that doesn't necessarily or at all reflect the views of the people who vote for them. At least certainly not all of them. Certainly not. There's no dissenters in the DUP as far as public figures are concerned. They're against the pro-Trump line. But an awful lot of people are not. They regard Trump with amusement. Some of them, they shouldn't, but they do. They see him as a sort of a clown figure in the same way. You know, but when people come to vote, no matter what the proposition is, when you've got sectarianism as deep as it is, because of history, sort of in the North, people will vote for their own community, and they hold it together. The cohesion of the community becomes more important than the differences, which might sort of make it, which might end that coherence. You know, in other words, sort of identity. Trumps everything else, so to speak. And I think you get that in lots of places. You wonder, why do people vote for Trump? Some of it is that. There's no question. But some of it is that. And some of it's that everywhere, where you get sort of big numbers of people sort of voting for right-wing parties. If you look deeply, not all that deeply, you don't have to look. You can see the way in which identity politics is part of the explanation for it. Now, I don't want to get started sort of identity politics and what's wrong with them, but I do think that sort of we underestimate the strength, sort of the influence of identity politics, and that is true in the United States as well. Sort of, and it goes, I will go to some way towards explaining the Irish vote and sort of and the way it operates. Not so much the Irish vote, but the position of the Irish community in America, which is very, very pro-state, pro the US state, whatever else I think. And that could be traced right back. That goes back to the 19th century and the way in which the Irish community, being Catholic, being English-speaking, and so forth, and the way in which the Catholic Church, there's not enough attention paid to the Catholic Church in the United States, in my view. You know, sort of the Catholic Church negotiated. Just as an example of something, the Catholic Church negotiated a position for the Irish community in the American state in the 1860s and 1870s. Look at the rules, the basic laws, and they say citizenship open to free white men. Free white men. Not Hispanics, not Chinese Americans, certainly not African Americans, free white men. The Irish American community, at least the men, sort of, was the section area, were all incorporated very, very quickly arrive on the boat, you got citizenship started within the next few weeks. That happened over and over again. That is why there's so many Irish American cops. The Catholic Church negotiated with the American state, with Abraham Lincoln and his successors, Cardinal McHugh of New York. You give us a status in the United States. You give us and we give you loyalty. We'll give you a service to the state. There was a point in the history of San Francisco where every single policeman, and they're all men, was an Irish Catholic. Every single one. Nobody else. Look at the people, I'm going to listen to 41 shots that am I referencing the same man again. The 4 cops involved in that were all Irish Americans. They're all Irish. All of them were members of the Emerald New York Police Department type band. And they shot that Amadou, I forget how you pronounce his name, and then are defended by the police union, which is dominated by Irish Americans. The point that I'm making is this: and when you look to see what the sort of Irish people think of America and what the Irish Americans think of Ireland and so forth, the position that the Irish community was given, was allocated in the United States, explains an awful lot about, when I mentioned it before, the duality whereby people can be revolutionaries abroad or far abroad. And at the same time, conservative, patriotic people are back in the United States. That's part of the dynamic by which sort of the United States has integrated so many people from different backgrounds, and particularly the Irish, who have got sort of really sordid history sort of in the United States.
Yes, thank you for that. Becca, do you have any thoughts on this, or on sort of the question that I raised, which had come up in the comments a good bit, on what are sort of the global implications of, potentially a Biden or Trump victory?
Well, I think I don't remember who it was who said it either. It might have been Eamonn, that this is a global election, whether or not the people in the U.S. know it or not, but it does have repercussions for the rest of the world. The U.S. is still at the moment the largest empire, in relative decline, but the largest, still. And I think that Eamonn talked a fair bit about sort of U.S. imperialism, and I think that that's one of obviously the big impacts of the election. Now, Trump has has sort of a right-wing nativism, so to speak, in that he would argue, against further wars. Yet he has been, at the helm the last 4 years as, wars have continued. It's not the case that he then, is a dove at all. Whereas Biden would be more similar to sort of your Clinton era, Obama era Democrats that were less outwardly hawkish, but very much for securing U.S. interests across the world, and so the world over. And I think we can expect more of that. And I think that that's one of the realities of the Democrats, that someone in the comments said, it's two sides of the same coin, or just as bad as the other. Now, I don't think that's true. I think Trump is significantly worse than I think the Republicans are worse than the Democrats, not only in terms of their actions and their policies and sort of and the right-wing nature of them. That doesn't mean that people are going to be less exploited or people are going to be less oppressed under the Democrats. Those are both true. But it also impacts the way in which the populace responds, right? So whether or not you have right now a demoralized population on the left, or if you have one that is excited. So I think coming out of this election, I think some of the global impact will be around obviously foreign policy and economic policy for sure. But I also think that hopefully out of this election, if Biden ekes through with a slim majority, that all the people that were out in the streets of the past year can remain committed to defunding the police, remain committed to fighting against racism, remain committed to fighting for healthcare and a Green New Deal and et cetera, and that there isn't a euphoria or there isn't a feeling, a honeymoon period, and that Biden is immediately met with protest. and that if there are mobilizings of the right wing to try to hold on to some of the power and confidence that they built under Trump, that those are also faced down by the left, by progressives, by people who don't want to see the right organizing and mobilizing. If Trump wins, I hope that there, on the other hand, there's, obviously, I think that in order to win, there needs to be some stealing of an election, and so I hope there's, a mass movement, the general strikes, the kind of thing that can actually inspire people worldwide to fight against the right. And so I don't know what the next weeks will bring. Obviously, it's Thursday. We thought when we planned this meeting that we were going to be able to have a meeting with an election result, but it's obviously closer than we thought. And I think, as Kirstin said, it's a low time right now. It's not a time where people feel very inspired, is a reality. And hopefully there can be some international solidarity in which people say, yes, get rid of Trump. That's a victory. But now we have to fight for the real material conditions that people deserve in the United States, but also the world over, such as living in a anti-racist, pro-woman, et cetera, more equal society where people have the things that they need to live.
Thank you, Becca. I think that was a really good emphasis, perhaps, to draw this discussion to a close with. I think definitely the fact that the Democrats, they've always pursued economic policies that have just exacerbated inequality and undermined any support that they've had. I think it really just shows why they're underperforming so much when we're in a year, as I think Kirstin really emphasized well, and there's been just massive amounts of deaths in the US due to COVID, and those deaths have been very unequally distributed. But I think you're right that whichever way this goes, and I know I was checking my phone up until like 25 past to try and see if things had come in from Nevada at all. But I think whichever way that it goes, that really what needs to be done is to show solidarity and build sort of that movement on the ground, to not let all the fire of the Black Lives Matter revolt dwindle. So with that, I want to thank you both for your contributions. I think we covered a lot of very interesting ground there. Blue Jeans, Bruce Springsteen, I think we left no stone unturned. So, and thank you everyone for tuning in and for leaving your comments and questions. I think we had a really good, interesting and full discussion. And I just say to keep abreast of this content, this great content, to like the Rebel Facebook page and to check out the articles. We're going to be having lots more coverage of the election coming in as it happens from people in Ireland and in the States. So a lot to be looking forward to, and all different types of content as usual. So with that, I guess I'll say good night and take care.